Hello everyone. This first lecture video is going to include how to put together the flute, the parts of the flute, and how to form an embouchure. Now when you are teaching a beginning 6th grade flute class, I would highly recommend that you have your students sit on the floor as they put their instruments together for the first few weeks. Middle school students have a tendency to open cases upside down, and so sitting on the floor prevents any accidental dropping of the instruments. So when you open your case, you have 3 parts of the flute. You have your head joint, you have the middle joint, and you have the foot joint. Sometimes you also hear this referred to as the end joint. As you line up the flute, this is one of the most important parts. The head joint, you want the first key here. I'm trying to get it so that you can see. So this first key here, the very first key, you want the center of the key to line up with the outside of the tone hole. So hopefully you can see this. So right here lines up with the outside portion of the tone hole. The end joint, you want this little rod right here to line up with the center of this key. And you can notice I'm playing on an open hole, but you can still see where the center of your keys are. So the rod, center of the tone hole or key. You'll notice also on my flute I have the low B. Yours most likely don't. That's okay. Most student model instruments, what your beginners play on, only go down to a low C. And so if you were to kind of just chop off this part of the flute, that's what you have, and that's what your students will usually have. And then eventually you progress and you buy a intermediate or advanced flute with the B, the low B key. So again, you have your head joint, the middle joint, and the foot joint or end joint, which may or may not have a low B key. We can have open hold flutes, which is what mine is right here, or we can have the closed hold flutes. And typically beginners should be starting on closed hole. What we recommend though is that you do a open hold flute, but then you put plugs in the keys. So you can see I have a little plug in this one right here. So you can put plugs in all of the holes, and then as the student becomes more advanced, you can take the holes out, or you can take the plugs out one at a time, and that way their fingers aren't trying to cover all of the holes at the same time. All right, let me know if you have any questions about that, putting the flute together. Most importantly, make sure that the head joint is lined up with the body of the flute. Now when it comes to forming the embouchure, we are going to be blowing across the flute and slightly down. So across the flute but slightly down. You want the lip plate beneath your lip, not on top of it, beneath your lip. And then again, blowing straight across but slightly angled down. Lips forward. This is something that is a discrepancy in the textbook. If you look at page, where did it go? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so page 27, under all of the embouchure and the aperture. So the aperture is how you form the embouchure. It's the tiny little opening within your embouchure is the aperture. On page 27, it discusses that this aperture, to create the proper aperture, you should be pulling your lips back. Some of you may have heard of this being referred to as the smiling method. So you pull your corners back. It produces a really easy sound, but it's not a very good sound long term. So it provides quick results for young students, but it's not going to lead them and the best direction for producing a quality tone. So what I would recommend instead is you actually push your corners forward, almost as if you were saying ooh, ooh, or poo is a method that usually works with young students as you are teaching them how to play the instrument. So if you say poo across the flute while blowing really fast, you can get the sound out. Very small aperture, which again is the opening of your lips, with your lips pushed forward, not pulled back, which is what the book says on page 27. Do not pull the corners back, push them forward. So what we are going to do, and this again, this is what you would want to do with beginner students in a band class, is you start with just the head joint. You can produce 4 pitches on the head joint. The first one, so first we're going to cover, and you can produce an A. So you can see I just have a very small aperture and I'm blowing very fast. Mostly across but slightly down into the flute. And then to produce a higher pitch, so again, 4 pitches on just the head joint. Hand covering, we have an A, and then we can produce a high E by blowing faster and angling our airstream up just slightly higher. To produce the higher pitch is more challenging. It takes more air, faster air, and a little bit smaller of an aperture. And again, you can aim your airstream just slightly higher to produce that higher pitch as well. So those are the first 2. You have an A and then you have an E. Don't worry if these are not perfectly in tune. The purpose right now is just to produce these pitches, and that will help when you have the body of the flute added on. So the next 2 pitches are both A's, and that's without your hand covering. So the lower one, again, aim your air slightly lower. And then the higher A, this is a really high one. This is the hardest of the 4. Very, very fast air. If you crack it, don't worry. And it doesn't have to be perfectly in tune, but very fast air, aim your airstream slightly higher than you were on the lower note. So by higher, I mean if you're aiming your air kind of like that, aim your air more like that. So just a little bit higher, and it sounds like this. These don't need to be pretty, they don't need to be in tune, but you want to be able to produce these 4 pitches. And again, this will help as you add the body of the instrument. So your first homework assignment is to be able to play these 4 pitches. What else? Keep the aperture small, very fast air, blow straight across but just slightly down, farther down for the low notes, a little bit less for the higher notes. Lips forward, not pulled back, lips forward. Keep the lip plate beneath your lip. It's easier to produce sound if you put the flute higher, but you won't get as good of a quality of sound down the road. So for students, you may see some of them doing that because it produces a faster result in producing sound, but down the road it's a really hard habit to break. The only other thing, so you can think the syllable poo, poo. You can think about blowing across a bottle. That's kind of a common analogy that we use when teaching beginners. Most of them can relate to that. And I've heard of people using pretend like you're spitting rice. That may or may not help. So any of these methods, if you're having trouble producing sound, try that. Especially the pop bottle. You can usually produce a sound that way. work on producing the lower pitches first with your hand and then without your hand, and then you can do the higher notes. Tends to be easier to do it in that order. And I think that's it. If you have any questions, let me know. We can go over this more in class. I'm recording this because we can't play in class right now, and I want you to be able to see the embouchure, which you can't see with the masks as well. So hopefully this is helpful. If not, ask me any questions that you may have. Thank you.